Alex is ready. Welcome to another edition of Trail Runner Nation. My name is Don Freeman.
And I'm Scott Warr. There are so many new studies, scientific discoveries, research that's done, and it's tough for us runners because we're always out there running and we're listening to this stuff, and we never know really what's true, what's not. And that's why we enjoy our guest today, Alex Hutchinson. He's been coming on our podcast for a long time, helping us understand what's the fake news and what's the real stuff. What should we really be paying attention to? Or maybe what we've been hearing and seeing in social media really doesn't have any scientific backing. So Alex is back with us. Alex is an award-winning science journalist and author specializing in endurance and performance. He's a friend of course, the nation here. He's been on, get this, 13 previous times. However, there's a caveat there. 13 times he's actually been on, but we did a 3-part podcast series on his amazing book, Endure, Mind, Body, and the Curiously Elastic Limits of Human Performance. And it explores the boundaries of human potential. That book was so good that we did 3 separate episodes on that. And then we thought we'd throw a Hail Mary, and we reached out to him and said, hey, would you like to come on and talk about your book? And he said yes. And since then, he's been on 13 times. This is number 14. Just like Saturday Night Live, I think we have a green jacket that we can get you. That's the golfing thing, right?
I think we just tattoo him with one of our PEKs, one of the performance enhancing Cocapellis. He has a gift certificate for any valid tattoo artist to go ahead and populate that onto his right calf.
And not only is he a great writer and a good researcher, but he's also an elite he's an elite middle distance runner from Canada. He authors the article Sweat Science on outsideonline.com. If you haven't seen that, go there, subscribe. And I think, is it weekly, Alex, that you put an
roughly
article
weekly, 4 times a month. So it just depends on whether they all bunch up together. But
it's great information, short reads that'll educate and inform you. He can be found on alexhutchinson.net. Now, here is the biggest news. Forget everything else I just said. Here's the big news. He has a new book coming out. He told us about this, I think, 2 years ago, and it's finally going to press. It's in pre-sale status right now. You can go on Amazon or wherever you buy books and actually buy it. It's going to be released, I think, end of March. Is that right, Alex?
End of March. March 25th.
Excellent. And the name of the book?
Oh boy. Let's see if I can get it out in one. It's called The Explorer's Gene: Why We Seek Big Challenges, New Flavors, and the Blank Spots on the Map.
Can you give us an elevator pitch on why we should pre-order this for Christmas?
Well, because as you said, I'm a middle distance, but also a middle class runner. So if we want to have a good Christmas, I need you guys to order it.
Perfect.
But I mean, there are there's something in it for you too. Like, I think it's an interesting book. It's basically my attempt to understand why we're drawn to new things and new things. The subtitle, which was extensively workshopped, needless to say, about new flavors and blank spots on the map. That's my attempt to say that this is a very broad definition of new things, trying to understand why we're seeking the unknown. So the unknown might be, can I finish a marathon? Can I finish an ultra marathon? It also might be, what's it like in Peru, or whatever the case may be. Or maybe that other career would be better than the one I have right now. So we're constantly weighing this, what's called the explore-exploit dilemma. Do we stick on the familiar path, or do we strike out somewhere new? And there's a lot of research into both why our brains are wired that way, how we make those decisions, and whether we get them right or wrong, when we screw them up, how we can do better. So it's a deep dive into all that stuff. And you can see my elevator pitch is not very well tuned yet.
Well, it's a very tall building.
You got me.
And we made it. And I love the sound of it. And not only can I run that new distance, but can I make it to the next aid station? I mean, you can micro look at that whole concept, and there are a lot of challenges within the big challenge to get to the end.
Yeah, and like not to go too deep on this, but it's like one of the scientists I spoke to. So there's evidence that we are really wired this way. That we are the fundamental structure of our brains is to seek out the unknown, the sort of maximal uncertainty where we can learn the most. And one of the guys I spoke to who's sort of deep into computational cognitive science, but I asked him, like, why do I keep wanting to go out into the wilderness and do stuff like this? And he said, we're not born knowing our true capacities. The only way we can find out what we're capable of is by trying. And so I think that's that really like rung a bell for me of like, that's why I'm out there running races and stuff. Cause I can't theoretically know how far I can run or whether I can survive in the wilderness with, nothing but a jackknife or whatever. And not that I've tried that, but I can only try versions of these things or only discover my capabilities by trying them out. And I think that's a fundamental drive for all of us.
So the book, it's you can go on Amazon and wherever you buy books and you can pre-order it now. It's called The Explorer's Gene: Why We Seek Big Challenges, New Flavors, and Blank Spots on the Map. I'm really looking forward to it. And we've actually had one of our friends, Bob Crowley, already texted us a receipt that he's purchased the book.
He's a good man. He's a great man. and going back to what you said about when you first contacted me about coming on the podcast, and you said, "Do you want to come and talk about your book?" And it's like, you had me at book. Like, I'll go anywhere to talk about my book. And my wife's sick of hearing about it, so it's nice to find new people.
Well, and such a nice guy. He's actually been on. We used to do a Christmas. I don't know why we didn't do it this year. We usually did like some Christmas game show episode, and Alex agreed to come on for that. I mean, it was just a silly episode, but Alex was a good sport and came on and really was the star of the show.
And only mentioned his book 6 times, so
Hey, so today what we've done is we've gone into his archive of Sweat Science articles, and we've picked out some that kind of caught our eye or piqued our interest, and we're going to try to dive a little bit deeper into the articles and the research that Alex wrote about in these articles. And the first one is how to fight muscle power as you age. And this was a study that he researched and said that muscle power diminishes more than muscle strength as we get older. And Don, when you read this, what was your first question?
Well, I had to say the first thing I need to understand is what's the difference between muscle power and muscle strength, because I put them in the same category. I thought they were, words that express the same thing, a synonym. But can you help me? What's the difference between power and strength?
Because you're absolutely right. In sort of normal conversation, we use those words interchangeably. Your strength is how much force you can exert, like how strong a push can you do. Power is how much force can you exert per unit time. So how much force can you? So leaving aside the physics definitions, it's basically power is explosive. Force is like there's a fridge on your floor, and you're wondering, and you're going to push it across the floor, and you're just sitting there slowly grinding, pushing it, an inch at a time across the floor. Power it has to be done all at once. It's like, can you actually lift the fridge up? You have to, and you can't lift it like, I'm going to lift half its weight first and then the other half. It's either you can do it or you can't. So power is what it takes to jump. Power is what it takes to sprint. And power is what it takes to get up out of a soft easy chair when as you get older, or to climb stairs for that matter. So there's been a lot of research over the years suggesting that, well, colloquially we understand you need to have both some fitness and some strength to age well. It's actually power that's more closely associated with activities of daily living. So when people as they get older, when they lose the ability to get up the stairs or to get up out of an easy chair, it's this ability to exert force quickly that becomes a limiter before the actual raw amount of force. And I guess just to jump ahead to the next, maybe to anticipate your next question, we lose power more quickly than we lose strength. So the estimates in this paper, which was by some researchers from Marquette University, just summing up the literature, was that you lose once you're, let's say, in your 40s or later, you're losing, let's say, 0.5% to 1% of strength of your strength per year, but you're losing power at a rate of 2 to 4%. So sort of 2 or 3 or 4 times faster than strength. And so you might ask, well, how are you losing? I mean, power and strength both come from what you're doing with your muscle fibers. So why are you losing power quicker than strength? And there's a lot of different theories. Is it because your brain isn't sending the signals quite as, in a nice neat package, and so you're not recruiting your muscles as well? Is it something to do with the nerve transmission? Is it something to do with the muscles themselves? And the theory coming out of this study, which was testing basically a sophisticated way of testing where is the power going, and their main theory is that it's because we lose fast twitch muscles preferentially, and fast twitch muscles are what you need for power. And so as we get older, if you're losing a certain amount of muscle fibers, it's most likely that you're losing your fast twitch muscle fibers.
And so I listened to explanations like that, and it was a very good explanation. And thank you for.
I hear a but coming.
You hear the but I ask myself, why would that be? As we age, our bones become weaker, our tendons become more brittle. I mean, all of our musculoskeletal structure starts to decrease. We're not green sticks anymore. We're more brittle and fragile. So of course the body would reduce some of our overall power, but it would reserve some of the force. We could do it over time, but nothing explosive, because explosive could be dangerous to part of our structure. We could start fracturing bones and tearing ligaments. That's my explanation.
That's a very interesting pessimistic perspective there. So I'll FedEx you some cotton wool to wrap yourself in. But no, but seriously, it's a good question actually. Despite the sneer on my face, it's a chicken and egg question. Do we lose power because the body is smart and it's saying, yeah, let's downregulate this?
Right.
That's my vote.
Or do we lose power because we're grown-ups and we're not allowed to go to the playground and jump on the teeter-totter, and we don't play pickup basketball and all these sorts of things? In the comparable case of endurance, like where you ask, does our VO2 max drop because we just stop being as active, or is it like nature is aging is taking its toll? There was a study a year or two ago that concluded it was sort of 50-50. That it's half and half. And realistically, I wouldn't bet. Well, I would strongly suggest that it's probably something similar. I don't know if it's 50-50, but there's something to what Don is saying here, that this is just the way our bodies go. And there's also, the case that we just don't do the explosive activities we used to when we were younger. And so it kind of, we lose because of disuse.
So, yeah, go ahead, Scott. Alex just repeated what I was going to summarize as chicken or egg. From my position was, hey, the body downregulates because it doesn't want to tear itself up. And the chicken or egg, the other side is, hey, we don't do that stuff anymore, so we lose it just because we're not using it. So naturally we use it. Did I hear that properly?
Yeah, those are the two things at play, and I'm sure they're both at play. Mm-hmm. And the question is, do we have some ability to alter the trajectory a little bit? Even if some of it is inevitable, can we extend our health span, as it were, and give ourselves a few extra years of being able to get up the stairs?
And before we get to some of those ways that we might mitigate this loss, why should we care as endurance runners? Why should we care about power?
Yeah, I mean, I think to me the most compelling case is that even endurance athletes want to be able to get out of a chair at some point, right? Like, if you want to go for that run, step one is you're stuck in the easy chair and you can't get out. You're not going to be able to go for your run, so that sucks. So healthy aging, I think, is probably the strongest motivator for me. I do think this is maybe venturing a little bit into speculation rather than firm peer-reviewed literature, but my sense is that it's all muscular power becomes a greater limiting factor even to going for a run as we get older. Certainly I think so. I happen to be a very thin guy. And so I think I probably had about as little muscle as you can get away with for even in my prime. And as I'm now getting older, I feel like actually muscle mass and just having more muscle is a limitation to my ability to run even at a relaxed pace. So I noticed it, for example, when I read this paper. What it made, I happened to read this paper the day after having gone to do a workout with my training partners, a big training group, where we did a bunch of nice long intervals on grass where I was running pretty well and saying to myself, hey, I still got it. I'm running with these younger guys, not bad, Hutchinson. But then at the end of the workout, our coach was like, okay, and now go do, 5 hill sprints up that hill over there. And I used to, my best event as a runner was the mile. I was, as you said, a middle distance runner. So I was good at hill sprints. I just went over and I was just getting absolutely buried by these guys I'd been able to run with for the longer part of the workout. So I had this epiphany because I read the study right after that. I was like, yeah, my explosive power is gone. And that explosive power is what's going to help you get up hills, get up hills now, as well as getting out of a chair in 5 or 10 or 15 years or whatever it is.
And
Well,
so if you're using explosive power to step up over a high rock that's on the trail and you don't have that same push that you used to have, you start cheating and compensating and using different muscle groups and moving a different way to get you up. And
That,
some of
or
them,
you trip over the rock and break your nose, like
Right.
Actually, I did actually trip over a rock a couple of years ago on a mountain and it knocked my front teeth out. So, these are all very personal questions.
I didn't mean to dive into personal questions.
No, thanks
That
for
was
bringing
my
up
error.
my
I'm
trauma
sorry.
here, but anyway.
Go ahead, Scott. I interrupt you.
I was just going to say, there's a lot of chairs on some of these races at aid stations. And so you need to be able to, sit down in that chair after 50 miles and take a rest and then be able to stand up and get out of the chair.
Yeah, I think that the usefulness of power is definitely like, as much as I'm not a muscle guy, muscular power is a pretty useful thing to have.
And I've witnessed older, gentlemen trying to get up out of a chair. I'm thinking of a grandfather that would, as he stood up, it just wasn't a squat standing up. It was like a 2-part process. It was stand up, and he's bent over at 90 degrees, and then he uses his back extensor muscles to raise him up upright, so he's vertical. It was almost a 2-step process of getting out of the chair. Power was definitely diminished for him at that point.
Yeah, and I'll say, look, my dad's 89 and living at home still, and he lives nearby, so he comes over for dinner very often. And getting up out of a chair after dinner, it's very interesting because it's it's not like a sustained effort. He'll try, and either he'll make it up or he won't, and then he'll sink back into the chair and have to try again because it's all in one motion. Either he makes it up or he doesn't. And if he makes it up halfway, he can't just keep trying because it's not about sustained force. It's like either you make it up in half a second or you don't. And then that's the essence of power. You have to be able to exert enough power in that brief moment to get up out of the chair.
Huh. Well, since there's some older people on this podcast interview, I'm more curious about what can we do to stave off this degeneration of power and strength.
Yeah.
Are there some strengths? Is there a magical pill we can take?
The most important thing is to disregard Don's negative implications about how this is just nature's plan for us to get old. This is, you got to get that out of your head. Just maybe even try.
It is what it is.
It's working for me, Alex. It's working for me.
That's my most disdained phrase in the English language. It is what it is. I hate that. Anyway, go ahead, Alex.
Okay, but once you've taken that mental step, there's a lot of look. I guess I would say there's no like one single thing that is the obvious thing to do, but what I'm taking away from it is either incorporating more explosive motions, so things like box jumps. And even to give Don his credit, I would be cautious at this point of doing like, you go on the internet and you see people's crazy plyometric routines, leaping down off, tall dressers and then bounding back up. That'll tear my hamstrings in 0 seconds flat. But so more limited, but still valuable things of just even like a two-legged leap as high as you can onto a box. I do some of that stuff. So that's explosive. I play pickup basketball once a week, and that's It's humbling because I'm terrible now, but it's something that is very different from my running in that I do try and jump and sprint and change direction. So those sorts of explosive moves. I also, and this is actually, I don't know if it's controversial, but maybe a topic of discussion. I think there's maybe something to be said for lifting heavier weights, and let me preface that by saying that I've written many articles over the years on a body of research that suggests that it doesn't matter how heavy the weight you lift is, you can get an equivalent workout from lifting a heavy weight a few times or a lightweight or a medium weight a medium number of times or a lightweight a lot of times. That either way, you're going to push yourself to failure, or you can push yourself to somewhere near failure and get a similar stimulus. And there have been a bunch of very good studies, a lot of them coming out of McMaster University, which is not too far from me. There's a guy named Stuart Phillips who's led these studies, suggesting that with a low load, as long as you keep going until you can almost not do the next rep, you get essentially the same gains. I believe that, and so I've done most of my strength work has been with a few kettlebells and body weight. But I just I will confess or announce to the world that I just ordered a big squat stand to install in my basement because I'm going to try doing some squats with some barbell stuff. It's not because I don't think it's possible to do to get a stimulus in other ways, but I think it'll be. I'm a fan of variety. I wrote a whole book on explore versus exploit. I'm going to explore a different way of doing strength, and I feel like if I'm lifting some heavier weights, it'll be not easier, but it'll be more automatic for me to get to that stage where I'm recruiting my fast twitch muscle fibers, as opposed to relying on myself having the discipline. Let's say I'm doing push-ups, and let's pretend I can do a lot of push-ups. I might be more inclined to sort of quit each set when I'm getting tired, as opposed to when I've reached my limit. Whereas if I put the bar and a couple of feathers on either end of the bar and I'm trying to squat, I'm going to, it's going to take me to failure within a few reps, no matter what. So to sort of shorten that very long answer, plyometrics, which are explosive, like jumping type exercises, and heavy weights are two maybe promising ways of getting those fast twitch muscle fibers firing.
One of the things that I have dreaded doing, I still kind of dread it, but I started doing it because a coach told me you should do this, is some interval sprints. Instead of going out at the same pace that I normally run the loop that I run, do a 1 minute sprint, just, as hard as you can, or as hard as you feel capable of doing, just for a minute, and do that 5 or 10 times during your run. And I was skeptical, but found that there was some benefit that I found from doing that, not only with my running form, because I was able to get in a better running form when you're sprinting, but I think it was good for my muscle fibers as well.
I'll definitely endorse that, and I'll even take it one step farther. One thing I was thinking of doing this, I mentioned these hill sprints earlier. Those were maybe 15 or 20 second hill sprints. And I'm even doing some like 10 or 15 second ones where the goal is really to sprint, to take aerobic fitness out of the equation and say, how fast can I move my legs? How hard? And I do those uphill to try and really like make it in. And that's, I remember speaking to a scientist, Roger Cram, who's a very prominent biomechanist, and about calf strengthening, which is something that comes up sometimes as an important way of an important muscle to keep going. And I said, and he had done some research on the importance of calf muscles. And I was like, so do you do like calf strength training? And he's like, no, I just do hill sprints. So I've kept that in mind. So I do think sprints are a good, absolutely an effective way of recruiting some of those muscle fibers. But if you want to make sure you're recruiting the fast twitch ones, you have to actually give yourself a chance. Or I think it's useful to do it in a context sometimes where you're really sprinting, like maybe for 20 seconds, and maybe my instinct is always jog back down the hill. It's all about endurance. But I've been doing walk back down the hill, get fully rested and really sprint. And it takes, you do 4 hill sprints like that, and it takes, 2 minutes to add that at the end of a run.
Don't take that excuse out of my quiver, Alex. I don't have the time to do my sprints today. You just took it out of my quiver. What about dietary interventions? Can we do something there that can help with decreasing the rate of loss?
Is this a coded question about steroids, or is this actually about diet? Diet. Actual diet. Oh, okay. Yeah. No. Yeah.
I'm taking a cupboard full of supplements, Alex, all of them are legal.
Yeah. Look, the protein is probably the worth mentioning here, and there are various studies where you make sure people are getting enough protein. You give them a supplement or whatever, and maybe they get a bigger bang for their training buck. You don't get strong just by eating protein. You have to combine that with actually doing some strength training, and it's going to vary. The relevance of this is going to vary depending on from person to person. So people who are already eating half a cow for dinner, you add some whey protein powder in the morning. It's not going to make any difference. They're already maxing out their protein. But there are lots of people who, well, let me phrase this carefully. There are probably some people who don't get enough protein, and that's definitely will limit or will affect their ability to maintain or put on muscle. A more debatable question is, let's say you have a piece of toast for breakfast, and you have I don't know, something small or something not very proteiny for lunch, and then you have a massive protein heavy dinner. You look at your daily protein intake, you're getting 100 grams of protein or something, so more than enough to fulfill what anyone would recommend. Does it matter that you're getting all your protein at dinner, especially if, let's say, you do your workouts in the morning? And there has been a school of thought over the last decade suggesting that, yeah, it does matter. And you should really try and get, 3 or 4, maybe even 5 meals and or snacks that have 20 or 30 or more grams of protein. And I've been a subscriber to that because I thought the research looked good. Lately, there have been some counter studies to that suggesting that actually, you know what, if you just get, there was a study in Holland, they called it the barbecue study, because they basically made it, let's give people the maximum amount of protein that any sane human could eat in one really obscene barbecue. So they were giving them like 110 grams of protein in one sitting. And they found that the effect on the formation of new muscle protein, it was still going on. I can't remember if it was 12 or 24 hours later. Like, there was a lot of delayed effect from this huge dose of protein. I would say at this point, this is still a scientific question that is unresolved, whether you can just get all your protein once a day or whether you should spread it out. Where I'm going with this is that I'm trying to be conscious of making sure that I have some protein at breakfast and some protein at lunch, and sometimes I'll have some yogurt or something before bed to get a little more protein. So I'm spreading it out, but it's not clear that actually matters. It's a hard question to answer really definitively.
Well, I'm going to take a stab at that, Alex. And this is only a podcast, not a research paper, but I subscribe to what you're saying, under the category of moderation. If we think about moderation, that usually has a little more truth to it, or closer to the truth. And what I learned years ago was, hey, you can digest 30 grams of protein at any given meal. And if you have more than that, it's offloaded as fat storage or carbohydrate, energy source. Your body can only metabolize so much. So spreading it out made sense to me. And that's why I subscribe to what you're doing, a little in the breakfast, lunch and dinner, snack sometime. So just constantly streaming it through. So I think just because a new study comes out doesn't make it a better study. I'm sitting back in the old days in the dogma of spread out your meals equally. So I concur with what you're doing.
That surprises me, Don, because usually you like to go back to the hunter-gatherer story where we only got one antelope a month and we had to gorge ourselves on protein over the course of 5 days, and then we went starving with protein for 3 weeks.
Things
So
were
I'm
hard.
surprised. I'm surprised you took the moderation track.
Well, you're supposed to share with your tribe's people, so I think there's moderation in there.
Okay.
Yeah, we can construct a scenario. No, Don, look, that's basically where I'm coming at. It's one of those combinations where there's some research suggests that's true, and it just kind of makes sense and sounds reasonable. So that's where I'm going with it. I want to acknowledge that, this idea of you can only take 30 grams. Maybe it's not as hard and fast as we thought. Maybe you can still use it, but is it as optimal? It doesn't. I tend to think probably not, and also it's just like, come on, man, 100 grams in a meal or whatever. Like,
it's a lot.
Get yourself a decent breakfast and lunch, and but I guess what I would say, there's enough uncertainty that if there's a listener sitting there saying, but I like my 100-gram barbecue every night, and I don't like eating breakfast, and it works for me, more power to you. Like I'd say the evidence isn't definitive enough to force people to change if they feel that what they're doing is fine.
Where does the bell curve drop off? What age do we really need to? I mean, we should probably be doing good cross training throughout our careers, throughout our lives. But where should we really start focusing on trying to slow down this?
Next year is a good time to start, is what I've tended to be saying for the last 20 years. But no, I mean, look, there's actually, if you want to go to the sort of physiological logic, it's a lot easier to put on muscle when you're 20 than it is when you're 40. So if you're a young guy out there or a young person out there, go put on some muscle, because it doesn't get easier. The decline starts to become noticeable based on my personal experience in the 40s. There's some talk of like an extra break point, in the 60s or 70s, where the decline starts getting steeper. It's hard to know whether that's a real thing or whether it's just an artifact of people's lifestyles or whatever. Basically, it's just this sounds awful, but it's just basically one big, long, slow decline. So start now, make it a routine. You don't have to become like a gym rat going and pumping iron every 4 days a week or whatever, but think of ways, whether it's hill sprints, whether it's incorporating some jumps, or whether it's putting a squat rack in your basement. Think of ways that you can be incorporating some explosive or heavy lifting in your life. Make it something that's just, even if you're 30, you make that a habit, then it's going to be a lot easier to sustain and ramp up as time goes on. It's always hard to add new things into your routine. So if you can work on it in a small and incremental way, that's a good way of going it.
And that reminds me of the comment. I think it was Ben Greenfield when we had him on, and Phil Maffetone. Maybe it was Mark Cucuzella. I've dropped as many names as I can there, of putting a heavy kettlebell in the middle of the room. And as they walked through the room, they'd just go over and lift it a couple times, put it down, and that was their routine. They had through the doorway, through a threshold, they had a chin-up bar. They did a couple chin-ups, and they moved through. That was the cost to go through the door. And at the end of the day, they'd done a lot of kettlebells and a lot of chin-ups.
Yeah, I think there's ways of incorporating it into life that don't have to feel so arduous.
Yeah.
And in the future, Alex, I'll drop your name in that list of 3 or 4 that I did.
I appreciate that.
It often comes up. Your name often comes up. Let's move on to another one. We're not going to get through the 7 or 8 articles that I picked out, but we all know that endurance sports is very much a mental game. And there was a study that you cited in one of your Sweat Science articles called "How Meditation Can Combat Mental Fatigue and Supercharge Your Endurance." Tell us about the study that you researched and what were the findings.
Yeah, let me start with some context, which is that my natural default position is that anything you can't measure is all a bunch of crap. So I start with a healthy level of skepticism about things like meditation. That being said, over the last 10 years, let's say, I wouldn't say there's been like brilliant final proof studies that meditation and mindfulness and related concepts can affect athletic performance, but there have been some interesting breadcrumbs suggesting that actually, look, the fundamental challenge of an endurance race is staying focused and being non-judgmentally aware of your unpleasant sensations and, not letting it throw you off. And so it kind of makes sense that developing those skills or those habits or those abilities would help performance. And there are some hints that it might be. It's a very hard thing to study in an objective way because you can't have, it's very difficult to have a placebo meditation intervention. You know if you're meditating, right? And so then you sort of end up with this situation where if you get a bunch of people who believe in meditation, then it works. And if you get a bunch of people who don't believe in meditation, then it doesn't work. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So anyway, that's the preamble to say this study is an attempt, not a perfect attempt, but another one of these breadcrumbs that catches my attention. And it was a study out of Taiwan. And what they did is they collected two groups of fairly serious athletes. And I'm trying to remember, I think they were training an average of, I think it was about 16 hours a week. So more than 2 hours a day. These are, they're, if you get people who don't train, then whatever you do, they're going to improve. And then you think, hey, this works. But it's like, no, you could have just sort of, said, hey, let's go, buddy. And they would have gone faster too. So these were people who were already well trained. And they were able to collect a group where half of them had some long-term experience with meditation, that they'd already been meditating of their own volition. And I can't remember, maybe it was 30 or 40 minutes a day they would typically meditate. Or maybe it was per week. Maybe I can look at it.
It was per week.
Per week, yeah.
40...
So not a ton of meditation. It's not like they're on the mountaintop in a retreat. They're like, they wake up in the morning and they do 10 minutes of mindfulness 3 times a week or whatever. And then they compared them to a matched group of athletes who had no meditation experience. And they said, let's do a bunch of tests. And so they tested their personalities and their sort of psychological profile to make sure that they weren't completely different. And they were mostly the same, except the meditators scored higher on one little test of mindfulness in daily life, which you'd expect if they're meditating. And then the athletic test was, let's have them do an endurance test, but we'll have them do it immediately following basically a computer game that is designed to inflict mental fatigue. So you do one of these tasks that requires a bunch of focus, very similar, sort of an analog to the focus that's required in an endurance race where you have to you're constantly being bombarded by the sensation that you want to slow down and you're having to overcome that desire. So they have a computer game or a computer task that inflicts mental fatigue, and then you go do this endurance test. And so what they find in general is that if you do the endurance test and then you do without the pre-mental fatigue, and then you do it again in a mentally fatigued condition, your performance will be worse when you're mentally fatigued. That is, as you'd expect. So anyway, to cut the story short, that is what they observed in the control group, that when they were mentally fatigued, they got worse at the endurance task. In these meditators, they did not get worse. So after having mental fatigue inflicted on them, their performance didn't suffer. They were able to handle this mental fatigue. And so there's kind of two things that could be happening. One is that the computer task didn't mentally fatigue them because they were better at handling, at staying focused. And the other is that it did mentally fatigue them, but that didn't matter. They were still able to maintain their endurance performance. And I think just eyeballing the results, it looks like there was a little bit of both. So they were better at resisting mental fatigue in the first place, and they were better at sustaining their performance once they were mentally fatigued, which to me is that, it's what you would expect if you believe meditation is useful for endurance performance. And so even though it wasn't a randomized trial, it was getting people who already agreed or already believed in meditation. It's interesting.
And I think you mentioned that computer game or whatever they did was social media, right? Instagram and TikTok.
It was called Living in 2024. That's highly mentally fatiguing under controlled conditions.
Let me ask you this: Do you practice, or have you practiced meditation? Do you find that it's a benefit to you?
I do not. I have a hard time explaining why I don't, because I keep writing articles saying how awesome it is. But I don't. And I think that's partly because, like I said, right at the start here, I do have some innate skepticism that, you can show me 25 studies and I'm still like, yeah, maybe. Yeah, it's interesting. and partly because I'm a little bit kind of post-competitive in terms of uh, um, how much I care about my results and how much. So I mean, I guess what I would say is meditation is not like there's no free lunch. This is not like a pill that you just take. Meditation takes work. And I think that work could yield dividends, both in terms of, from what I understand, handling the slings and arrows of regular life, and also in terms of performance. But I have enough trouble slotting in time to go out for a run. And so when I'm faced with that choice of, do I want to sit with my legs crossed, which I actually can't get into that position even if I wanted to, or do I want to go out and have 10 more minutes to run? My answer is, I'd rather have 10 more minutes to run.
You know, Alex, I'll take that quiver out of your
the arrow out of my quiver.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah. I couldn't get the
right
metaphor
out of your arrow.
hey, if I'm going to take 2 minutes to run some hill sprints, you can take 2 minutes and do some meditation. So here's my question: if you know, this sport is such a mental sport, whether it's, you know, endurance running or triathlons, marathons, half marathons, you know, cycling, whatever. It takes some mental discipline. If not meditation, then what? How do we practice and build our mental capabilities, our psychological capabilities to face these hard tasks that are going to say, quit, slow down, you're not good enough? How do we practice that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the simplest answer is you go do it. You go run and you go
Experience.
Race. And I think there are situations or for people sometimes where they get in a negative kind of pattern where we're just doing it isn't enough. You're in the habit of quitting every time you get to the halfway mark, or and, you know, you're in some sort of dysfunctional loop, and then working with a sports psychologist or doing some meditation, maybe that's going to help you get out of it. But in the normal course of events, for most of us, I think putting yourself in the situation is a great way to experiment with different ways of handling discomfort, different ways of motivating yourself. And, you know, we're all kind of keeping mental notes of when things went well. But so you're remembering, you know, that time, you know, I had this great race and I didn't do any long runs for the last 3 weeks. So maybe I shouldn't do long runs for the last 3 weeks. Well, we're also kind of keeping note, ideally, of what kind of headspace we were in, what we were thinking about, what mental approach we had to the race. I was really, really psyched up for this race. I cared so much about this race and it was crap. Well, maybe you need to not invest so much mental, you know, not make it such a big deal, or maybe you need to remember, you know, be more focused on why you're doing it and what you're hoping. Anyway, we get to try different things out, and we get to learn every time we race or every time we do hard training sessions. That doesn't mean we max out what we're capable of doing. Again, like in this Taiwanese study, all the athletes were doing 16 hours a week of training on average, but the meditator still had an edge in this sort of mental side. So there is sort of more potential on the table. But I think as a starting point, I do think we're working on this all the time. I do think that it's not that we're leaving it completely neglected.
You know, I've been accused of being a selective listener, and you know, I think it's true. I probably am. I've heard the term running is moving meditation, that you can meditate while you're running, and you can practice mindfulness. You can practice compartmentalizing some of this negative discussion or conversation that you're having with yourself, that you're tired, that boy, that certainly doesn't feel good. I should stop and quit and walk back home. You know, these are opportunities to practice in real time what you're planning on doing on race day. So every run should have some benefit, something you can quantify and say, yeah, today I worked on speed. Today I worked on, you know, hill repeats. Today I worked on the mental side, and I really got out there and was mindful during the process and meditated. And I would think we should probably do a study, Scott. We should fund a study, and our two candidates are probably you and I, because that's how what we can afford is to go out there and try some of this mental meditation while we're moving and see if there's any validity to it. And we can have Ryan there, since he's not going to join us on the run. We've tried to twist his arm. He can be our test group, our control group, and we'll have him meditate while we're running. And then Alex could review it and include it in the addendum to his new book, which is called what, Alex? What's the name of the new book?
Oh, the Explorer's Gene, since you bring it up.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I think this is brilliant, and I look forward to my consulting fee. But yeah, I mean, to your point, Don, I think maybe one piece of practical advice is now and then, maybe not every run, but like tune in to what you're thinking. Like when you're out on a run, be conscious of what that internal monologue is, and if it's horrendously negative, maybe that's a sign you need to think about it. Like I think we've talked on previous episodes about motivational self-talk, but the idea of taking control of your inner monologue. So step one is listening and trying to understand what is going on in your mind. Are you selling yourself short because you're just deciding that it's too hard? And if so, what can you do to change that? Or if you're like, no, I had negative thoughts, I acknowledged them, but I kept pushing, then it's all good. You don't need to stress about it.
And I'm reminded that this is something that you can easily practice. One of the strategies that we've learned over the years is to go on a long run after a long day's work, where you're mentally shot, you're physically shot, you've been standing all day or whatever, you're just fatigued and you're tired and you want to watch the football game and have a good dinner and go to bed. Instead of doing that, go out for a long run and experiment with how does your mind work in that situation when you're already mentally fatigued.
Yeah, I mean, a few years ago there was a fad for low carbohydrate training, in the sense of, hey, I'm going to not eat any carbs for dinner, and the next morning I'm going to get up and run, and I'm going to get extra training benefit from running where where I start out on empty. So what you're saying is start out mentally fatigued, and so you'll kind of maybe get access to the zone that you would normally only get to in races, and learn to kind of deal with those right from the beginning of the run, be having to deal with some of those negative thoughts.
And one of the things that come to my mind as we're saying this, and I've said it before, but heck, if I didn't repeat the things that I've said, I probably wouldn't have anything to say at all. And if you really want to know yourself, who you are, then go out and do something hard, because you are going to get to see from the inside out and from the outside in, who it is that you are. But you've got to go do something you're thinking that, that's questionable. I'm not sure I can do that successfully. I'm going to do it. Pushing yourself, pushing a limit, and finding out what vehicle you're made of your human existence. What am I capable of? Then go out and try something hard. You're going to get introduced, and you'll probably be pleasantly surprised about who you are. But if you don't try that, test it, and put yourself on the line, you may never get introduced to that person that is you.
That's a deep thought, and I will just the one thing I'll add to that is, and if you just find out that you're not as tough as you thought, that doesn't mean that's not necessarily who you are. It's just where you are right now, and that this is something you can get better at. So do hard things, and then do harder things as time goes on.
Perfect. Well stated.
Thank you, Alex.
Well stated. In our remaining time, I want to get into this one because it was one that really kind of fascinated me. And that is the study that revealed how women's VO2 max differs from men's. And, over the course of the last few years, I've become surprised. I'm sure that everyone else isn't surprised that how little research has been done and how many studies have been done that just focus on one very small demographic of human beings. And women have often been left out of that. We're just at the tip of the iceberg learning how a woman's body works. We think we know how it works, but we're going, well, wait a minute. They're different than men, and it works different. So tell us about VO2 max and how it works differently in men than women.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, first of all, yeah, it's definitely something that everyone's now aware that women have been excluded from research, but then you keep seeing studies that are still men. And
right.
It's like, so it's kind of like me in meditation. We know there's something here, but why isn't it changing? So, I think it's important to acknowledge when we do get some studies This study that you're referring to was a Brazilian study where they basically compared a bunch of older and younger women, both. I think they were runners and non-runners. So 4 different groups: older runners, older non-runners, younger runners, younger non-runners, with the goal of trying to understand, going back to what we were talking about earlier about age-related decline. I guess it's a bit of a theme today. Why does VO2 max decrease when we get older? What is the problem? And I it's probably worth a brief explanation of what VO2 max is.
Mhm.
Sure.
VO2 max is the maximum, or the fastest rate at which you can use oxygen. So the fastest rate at which you can breathe oxygen in from the air, get it from your lungs into your bloodstream, have your heart pump it out to your muscles, have your muscles take that oxygen and put it to use in aerobic metabolism. In other words, in generating the energy needed, or generating the fuel needed for, or the reactions that power your muscles. So if you have a high VO2 max, it means you can produce a ton of aerobic energy and keep running for a long time without going anaerobic. Once you go, because aerobic is sustainable energy. If you don't have a high VO2 max, then you have to start generating energy via other pathways which produce lactate in your blood and cause really immediate fatigue that forces you to slow down quickly. So high VO2 max, very tightly linked to endurance. And there's been a lot of debate and discussion and research over the years as well, what limits our VO2 max? What is it that defines how much oxygen we can use? And so you can think of it in 2 main buckets, which is it a supply problem or is it a demand problem? So is it that are you limited by how much oxygen you can breathe in, go from your lungs into your bloodstream and pump to the muscles? Or is the limitation how quickly your muscles can grab this oxygen and use it? And so in your muscles, you have mitochondria, the powerhouses of the cell, that are helping convert the ATP that generates the energy to use your muscles. If you don't have much mitochondria, or if it's not very good, or then it doesn't matter how much oxygen you're pumping to your muscles. If you only have 2 mitochondria, you're not using very much of it. And so your VO2 max is going to be low and you're not going to be able to generate much aerobic energy. And so the general thinking based on all these years of research in men is that as we get older, the problem is on the oxygen supply side, that, it's our heart and our circulatory system are declining. So we just can't get enough oxygen to the muscles. But if you look at how much oxygen a given amount of muscle can use, it stays the same. And so what this new Brazilian study found was different. What they found is, yes, the oxygen supply was decreasing in the older women, but also the oxygen demand for a given level of muscle, they were not able to use as much oxygen. So this is suggesting, on the basis of just one study, so like, who knows, it's something that will need to be replicated and studied further, but it's suggesting that on average, older women may be facing a change in how their muscles use oxygen, not just in how much oxygen they're able to supply. And one of the theories on that is that as we get older, you start to get fat that is mixed in with the muscle. Mm-hmm. And that tends to be more common in women than men for various reasons, just in terms of how their metabolism works. And that may be what's making, as they get older, their muscles they contain more and more fat. And so they're, for a given level of muscle, they're just no longer capable of using as much oxygen. What's the countermeasure to that? I'm not entirely sure. Probably training of some sort, whether strength training. I mean, strength training is probably important in terms of reducing the amount of fat that interpolates into the muscle. Aerobic training is also probably important. So I'm not sure there's like a really crisp takeaway from this, but it's a suggestion that how we think about aging in men and women might need to be, the focus of training might be a little different based on these differences.
Now, earlier I stated, just because it's a new study doesn't mean it's a correct study. In this case, I think the newer study is the correct study. I think it can go either way. I think they're hitting on something very important here, and I think they're more correct on this one. I think the fact that there's more fat in the muscle, that we lose some efficiency, we're not practicing in keeping that mechanism tuned up because we're using it. I think that we're probably getting enough oxygen in with breathing and circulation. It's not like the heart rate is slowed down and the volume is decreased. We're starving off the muscle because we're not getting enough oxygen. I'm going to think that the Brazilian study has something there when they're looking more at the end line, the muscle itself, and not the intake and of the oxygen. That's what I heard anyway, as I'm listening.
Yeah, and just to take your point about how we know when to trust a new study versus an old study.
Yeah.
One key point about this is that there aren't earlier studies about how VO2 max changes in women, or at least there's very few. So we take this new study; it's the best evidence we have. The protein debate we were having earlier, that there's conflicting studies that say the opposite. Here, it's a question of like, well, we had no evidence, now we have some evidence. So we won't say we're 100% sure that it's right, but we'll say this is where, for now, this is the best evidence we have, and it suggests that there's something different going on in women.
In the study, Alex, they made the split at age 50. So the older ladies were over 50. The younger ladies were younger than 50. Did they see that there was a difference between the sedentary and the active on both sides of that coin?
Yeah, first of all, as a 49-year-old, I fully support this idea that 50 is where old starts. But yeah, look, the differences between the runners and the non-runners were substantial. And one thing that maybe a detail that's worth picking out is if you look at the rate of decline, the runners had a steeper decline than the non-runners for going from young to old. And in part, this is just like, okay, if you're super fit, or at least, and this was a cross-sectional study, not a longitudinal, so it's not that the same people declined, but the older runners compared to the younger runners, it was a steeper drop-off. And this is in part because if you have a really high value to start with, it's harder to maintain it. But it's not that running does something bad to you or anything, but it is a reminder that you can't just be fit until 49. And again, as a 49-year-old, this is something I'm trying to take to heart. You can't just say, well, I trained hard from the ages of 13 to 49. Now it's time to get in that easy chair, and I don't care if I can get out. You have to keep exercising if you want to maintain your fitness. Otherwise, you will be trending back towards the non-exercised norm. You'll still have had benefits from the first 49 years of exercise or whatever, but yeah, the VO2 max declines more steeply, in part because in this particular study, the older runners or the older exercisers did less exercise than the younger ones, which is sort of pretty normal. I do less exercise now than I did when I was 20. It's like, right. Yeah, that's part of the reason that I'm less fit than when I was 20. Yes, I'm older, but I'm also exercising a lot less. So if you want to stay fit, you got to keep exercising even beyond 49.
Yeah, we talked about common themes that are taking place in this conversation, and this fits underneath the category of if you don't use it, you'll lose it. And that seems to be consistent all the way through in each one of these topics.
Yeah. So in general for fitness, but also for the specific subdomains like explosive movement and endurance and VO2 max, you got to keep doing it all.
Or multiplication tables. You've got to practice them with some consistency. Otherwise, that 7 times 9 sometimes is elusive. You've got to think about it for a second.
Don't you have your slide rule on your desk there, Don?
I do. It's right by my inkwell, Scott.
Hey, there are so many good articles on sweat science. A couple that we were going to talk about today that are, maybe we'll have to have Alex on in the near future. Why top Olympic athletes use baking soda to boost performance. There's some interesting stuff there. And the other one that I had on my list was a new study used machine learning to predict athlete recovery. We've talked about AI and machine learning, and there's a really cool article that Alex wrote on that. Alex, thank you so much for coming on. We're really looking forward to the new book, The Explorer's Gene. due out at the end of March. You can pre-order it now. What kind of gift giver would you be if you put a gift card in someone's stocking that said they have this book coming in at the end of March? It's the Christmas gift that keeps on giving.
You'd be a hero, because there are studies suggesting that anticipation is actually more fun than the actual event itself. So rather than just having Christmas is over on the 26th, it's like Christmas keeps going until the March 25th.
You can put it on the mirror in the bathroom and see it for 3 months prior to getting it. Oh, that's brilliant.
And Scott brought up a couple of great studies that we didn't get a chance to talk to, but they're still out there. If you want to get out there and read them, how do you get a hold of Sweat Science so you can be on the cutting edge like we are of reading this before we talk about them?
You can go to alexhutchinson.net, and there's links to all the various places where I write, including outsideonline.com, which is Outside Magazine's website, where I do 4 articles a month, each of them generally on a new study.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Alex, Scott and I often look at each other and say, why would a guy like Alex even come on this show and talk with us? We don't want to know the answer. We don't want you to even think about it. If you think about it, you might not come back. We just appreciate, we're grateful for you joining us.
Thanks, guys. I always have fun, and I appreciated the opportunity to mention the explorer's gene, which will be... Sorry, I couldn't even do it with a straight face. No, it's been fun.
Ryan,
thank you.
Next time we need to have a little bell. Every time Alex mentions a book, we need to ring a bell. I think that would be a fun tally. Hey, whatever you do, put on your shoes and go out and run.
Mas.